Hello, Gen Genies. Before we get started, Rich and I want to let you in on some exciting updates for our Patreon subscribers.
Patreon is a site where listeners can pledge a small monthly amount, either $5 or $10, to support the cost of bringing you your favorite podcast.
All patrons get early access to new CutOff Genes episodes before they're released to the public.
And along with our undying gratitude, you'll also be able to join our special patron-only Facebook group.
But the most exciting new perk is exclusive access to essays I'm writing from my upcoming memoir. And you guys can help me be editors.
New Patreon supporters will also get a shout-out on the podcast.
Rich and I enjoy bringing you the CutOff Genes podcast and would mean so much if you would consider supporting our labor of love.
Just go to patreon.com/CutOff Genes podcast.
Thank you all so much, my Gen Genies.
And now, on with the show.
Is your family tree a mystery? Are you fascinated by genealogy? Well, hip, hip, hooray, let's talk DNA with Julie.
The truth is in your genes.
In CutOff Genes.
Welcome to CutOff Genes, the podcast that helps you find your truth using nothing but DNA. I'm Julie Jackson, and I'm a genetic genealogist, henceforth known as a Gen Genie.
And I am Richard Castle, the co-host and producer of this podcast. Hello, Julie.
Hello, Richard.
It's a lovely fall day. I'm sort of enjoying the fall weather. I know it's a little warmer today, but it feels like fall now.
Overall, it's better.
Yes.
It's just better.
Just better. We had rain in Southern California, which we really needed.
Yeah, it got people in Southern California when it first rains. I know we mention this every year, but I did a TikTok about it because my daughter was flying in from New York and I was picking her up in Burbank. They circled Burbank for a good 45 minutes and then landed at LAX because of a little bit of rain.
Weird.
Yeah. But then they sat on the tarmac at LAX and said, yeah, I think we can land in Burbank. So they took off and then went back to Burbank.
Did they really?
They really did, which is good because I didn't want to have to go to LAX.
Well, I opened the door the other morning when it was raining to walk the dog, and Buddy stepped out, turned around, and walked back in.
Yep, he's like, nope.
I was like, you are so spoiled.
Hey, what's going on? You got any fun news?
I don't know if I announced this yet, but Northern Sky Theater in Wisconsin is definitely doing my musical Love Stings next summer, and they've made the official announcement, and I'm very excited about it because it was postponed from the summer of 2020 because of COVID, and then postponed again in 2021.
Right.
And so it's definitely on the schedule for 2022, and I'm very excited about this show. It's a full-length musical. It's fun. And you did a lot of the demos for it.
And so there's bees.
There's singing bees, and it takes place in 1963, and it's just going to be a hoot.
Yay! I'm excited.
Yes, me too. That's the big news of the week.
Today's a No Bones Day. That's not DNA stuff. That's TikTok stuff.
I've heard about this, but I don't know what it is.
Here's the thing. TikTok is not good for the neurodivergent, such as myself. Because it will suck your life away. I'm simultaneously in love and hate with it.
Really?
Yeah, but they're some of the funniest people I've ever seen, some of the smartest people I've ever seen, some of the most creative people I've ever seen, some of the best animals I've ever seen, but also some of the stupidest people I've ever seen. Who get highlighted often. And there's, depending on what you like to watch, apparently there's like a dark side of TikTok, and I have a very interesting things. Like I like to watch zit popping.
I don't know what that is.
Zit popping.
Oh, zit popping. Oh, yuck. Oh my God. Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I don't even want to know why. Okay. Yeah,
don't ask why. It's a strange thing.
Yeah.
But so I get a lot of those, and I cannot scroll through them. So yeah, there's that. But there's also just amazing thing. No Bones Day. There's a pug named Noodles. There's a 12-year-old pug, and every day his daddy comes and tries to get him up out of bed, and he lifts him up. He says, we're going to see if it's a bones or a no bones day. And if he lifts him up and then lets go, and if he just falls back down into his bed, it's a no bones day. Okay. And that means to be nice to yourself that day and just relax. But if he lifts him up and he stands, then it's a bones day. So go out there and get things done.
And he does this every day.
Every single day.
And he's amassed probably millions of followers.
Millions. It's delightful. And the term No Bones Day is obviously making the rounds.
Yeah.
So when you hear that, that's what that means. You're welcome, everybody. Now you don't have to find out for yourself.
Can you imagine if you and I, like, just, I don't know, the two of us from 20 years ago were suddenly transported and dropped into 2021 and heard us talking about this? We would not recognize ourselves. We were like, what the hell are we talking about?
Yeah.
Because I barely know what we're talking about now anyway.
Yeah.
But I think back
it's
at how much has changed in terms of like the how fast people become famous for the most ridiculous thing.
Yep. It's insane.
I mean, there were always people who were
insane.
famous for just being personalities. The people who would appear on, Hollywood squares that didn't really, they didn't really
Far
do
less
much.
of them, though. But they did do something other than a sex tape to get them there in the first
Yes,
place.
they were usually clever, or
Yes.
funny.
Or comedians or yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. But
some form of actor.
But now you can be famous for having no talent whatsoever.
You can be famous for being a terrible person, and people will still love you.
So I just read that one of the formerly unidentified victims of the serial killer John Wayne Gacy from the 70s was just identified because of DNA and because not just, they had DNA from the victim, but they didn't know who it was. And but because his relatives are now in the commercial DNA databases, that now they were able to finally say this is who it was by finding his relatives. And isn't that amazing that they can do that?
It's happening every day. Every day. There are lots of companies that do it every day, and lots of projects like not-for-profit projects, volunteers that are doing it as well.
I love that they're able to bring closure, even though it's sad, but I still think closure is closure, to somebody who always wondered, like, that person disappeared and you never had the answer. Like, where did he go? Did he do it on purpose? Is he living some life somewhere that he just didn't want to talk to him? Does he have amnesia? No. Now we know.
No, closure is important for everybody, regardless of what you think closure is. Closure to me means an end. Nothing else is going to come at me about this. No more surprises.
Right. I suppose it opens up a whole can of worms of still like, well, what happened to him? How did he die? I mean, obviously he was murdered, and they found his remains in an attic or something of John Wayne Gacy. So there's it always. But I would imagine any relatives had already entertained all of those most horrible, worst case scenario thoughts.
Right, and I bet they suspected too.
Sure, if you don't hear from somebody for that long. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I have some slightly different DNA news, but it's very exciting. This actually just in last night. DNA confirms living descendant of Native American warrior chief Sitting Bull.
Really?
Yeah. It's a really cool story, and just kind of groundbreaking, actually. So this guy, Ernie LaPointe, he's a Native American author and sun dancer, and for years he's maintained he's the closest living descendant of the legendary Lakota warrior chief Sitting Bull. And DNA analysis just finally verified those claims. Many people have tried to question the relationship, even though he had birth certificates, detailed family trees, and historical records to corroborate his connection. Some believed he lacked concrete evidence of a familial tie. So a University of Cambridge geneticist crafted a way to extract DNA from a lock of Sitting Bull's hair.
Wow, they had his hair?
Yes, I think it was like at it was in a museum.
Maybe they could have extracted some from his wounded knee.
I got nothing for that. It was good. I'll give you points for that. Okay. So this guy, the guy from the University of Cambridge, Eske Willersley, has always had a soft spot for the Native American leader. It led him to focus on unveiling the true members of Sitting Bull's bloodline. In the late 1800s, there's a little background on Sitting Bull. Tatanka Iotaki. What do you think about that?
If you pronounced it correctly or incorrectly, I would not know.
Thank you. Which translates literally to Buffalo Bill who sits down. So that was Sitting Bull's real name. Named in celebration of his bravery, led his tribe's resistance against United States troops. He oversaw more than 1,000 Lakota warriors in the sanguine Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876. It wasn't Wounded Knee.
Shows you how much I know about history.
Defeating the U.S. soldiers who attempted to confine tribes to certain areas, now known as reservations. The chief was assassinated on the morning of December 15th, 1890, after being woken in his bed by Indian police. So this guy read in 2007 in the in some magazine, the Smithsonian Museum had decided to return Sitting Bull's hair to Ernie LaPointe and his 3 sisters.
Okay.
So they had it.
Wow.
So he wrote to LaPointe and explained what he did and asked if he could have the hair or use the hair for his own, to see if he could verify anything. So it took him and his team 14 years to figure out how to uncover and piece together readable DNA from Sitting Bull's lock of hair. As it wasn't smooth and silky like the hair we find on our own heads, it was degraded, old, and broken.
You haven't seen my hair lately.
Well, you have seen mine. So they tried doing Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA, meaning sex-based DNA. They ultimately used autosomal DNA, which is the DNA that we use in our direct-to-consumer DNA testing.
Wow.
Which is basically what we use. LaPointe's blood tie to Sitting Bull was on his mother's side. Mm-hmm. And because he was biologically male, he wouldn't have inherited her DNA. So the Y DNA tracking wouldn't have worked anyway. So they were finally able to make an autosomal sample out of the hair.
Wow.
Provided.
It's amazing to me that they can do that from hair, especially where there's no follicles attached or anything.
Right. It used to be only, it had to be, they had to have the root in it.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, it would be incredibly expensive, but I'm sure there's only a certain amount of time before it's available to the general public. With Willersley's new DNA-backed proof of Sitting Bull's bloodline, LaPointe hopes to honor his grandfather by formally reburying his remains somewhere more meaningful than his current arbitrary resting place in the Dakotas.
Wow. That's amazing.
Cool, huh?
I love stuff like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, yeah. I wish I could retain some of it. Clearly, I didn't remember that Sitting Bull had nothing to do with Wounded Knee.
I, as somebody, and I always have the excuse that I wasn't born in this country, but I actually didn't know really who Sitting Bull was.
Oh, so.
But it's not part of my personal history. But it is now.
I will also add that at least when I was in school, and I don't know what they're teaching now, I don't remember hearing a lot about specific Native American the massacres and the horrible things, because it just
of course
was not emphasized, at least not when I was growing up.
No, and it was also sugar-coated.
Yeah, and it may have just been mentioned like in a list of facts,
Exactly.
You would hear about the massacre at Wounded Knee, but you wouldn't necessarily know who was massacred. And it was
right, unless you watched the movie.
Right.
That's how we find things.
And I never
out.
watched Westerns. I was more like, I want to watch musicals. I don't even like Western musicals.
Calamity Jane is my favorite.
I know, but I just can't get into it. Love Doris Day. I love her, and I love some of the music. It's just, as soon as I see the Western stuff, it's just, I get turned off. So, yeah. And
it seems so dirty.
Yes.
I mean, physically dirty. I just feel like I want to wash my hands. I feel like they need to take a bath all the time.
I was just more of an urban person, even though I grew up in a little tiny, tract home in a suburb. I was more like into like shows that took place in New York.
Yes. Me too. Indoor kids and city kids. That's us.
Yeah.
All right, here is, I cannot recommend enough, a new Netflix documentary called Found.
Okay.
It's a documentary about 3 teenage Chinese adoptees, 3 girls, obviously, whose parents had them do 23andMe tests, whose adopted parents had them do 23andMe tests, and they discovered they were cousins. It didn't say what level of cousins they were, But all in, I think they were like 16 to 18 years old, and they all traveled together to China. And they used a investigator in China that does this she mapped out where they were all from and where they were found, like what steps or what bridge.
Wow.
And also went to the orphanages that they were from and found their nannies, they called them nannies, who basically raised them until they were adopted.
And were they adopted as babies?
Yeah, at varying ages, but they're like, I think they were, over one. They were all over 1 year old.
And so they were all adopted by the same family? Is that?
No.
Oh, they weren't.
No.
Okay, all right.
Nope. 3 separate families. They found each other through DNA.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Yeah. So, and then also this investigator put advertisements out for that, with pictures of the girls and their birth dates, looking for the parents of these people.
Okay.
With a possibility. And 2 of them were all about finding the parents. One of them was not comfortable with it. She didn't know what to do with this information. Now, keep in mind that these girls were teenagers. And it's a lot of information to take in for somebody that young. So it was interesting to watch the reality unfold to these girls of how their lives have started and what it meant. And I think the most beautiful thing about it, and I'm not going to do spoilers, but they found several people that had done this, because the government wouldn't let you have more than one child without steep penalties.
Right.
And so they essentially had to do this. If they already had children and couldn't afford another child,
right.
or wanted a boy, none of that was actually brought up.
No, but that was a big issue, right?
Yeah. But there were people who responded to these ads who were so desperate to find and so hoping that these were their children. And you got to see a lot of, it's so important to acknowledge biological families and their trauma, as I always say. So it was really beautiful, just the way it was done. I'm not going to say how it turned out.
I'm going to look that up. Found on Netflix.
Found on Netflix. Really beautiful piece of filmmaking and very educational for people who don't understand what it is like to be adopted, especially through foreign adoptions.
Wow. I'm going to put that on my queue right during the break.
Should we take a break so you can do that?
Let's do that.
Okay.
If you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. Or consider supporting us on our Patreon page, patreon.com/CutOff Genes Podcast. Now back to Julie and me.
All right, I have a fascinating trenches case today.
Ooh.
A lot of people in the Facebook group will have noticed a side-by-side that I posted this last week. A gentleman with somebody who could purportedly be his father. And the resemblance was striking. Mm-hmm. And it's so funny because I notice this with men more than women. When, to me, somebody looks so identical, not just because of their coloring and their glasses, but I see features. And men, my husband is one of these people, are like, yeah, I don't see it. And he was one of those. He said, yeah, I don't really see it. I don't, the guy, the Pat, his name is Pat. He said I could use his name. But I was like, Pat, it looks like it could be you in a costume. But it's saying a lot of the people that saw it were like, wow. But it's an especially fascinating case and especially complicated, and it's not over yet, but I want to tell you what I found out so far.
Please, yes.
And how I got to this. So he already knew his mother, and she's changed her story several times, which is not a surprise. So I took the case, and his 3 highest matches were very high, like first cousin once removed level. And none of them had family names in common at all.
Okay.
But what they did have was a geographic connection within their ancestors. So a couple generations up, they had all been in the same area. Okay?
All right.
One match confirmed that her grandmother was a lady whose last name was Bjorgi.
Of course.
We all know what that means. But she didn't know much about her. And I spoke to her brother as well.
For new listeners, Bjorgi is the name that Julie uses for every name in place of somebody's real name. It's a
Yes.
placeholder.
Bjorgi. The second match was able to build out his tree by researching his family. And I was able to build out his tree, by researching his family. And in his great-grandfather's obituary, there was a mention of a sister, and she happened to be the grandmother of that first match.
Huh.
But she had a different name.
Okay.
But Bjorgi was somewhere in there. So I'm thinking that I looked at his obituary. I found the guy's obituary, the great grandfather of this match, and it said that it didn't say anything about him being adopted, but it said he leaves one sister, blah blah blah, and it was her.
Wow.
So I talked to that match, and he got me onto his grandmother, who was the daughter of this guy. And she told me that she had found out in her late 30s that her father had been adopted. Hello. And she had actually met that aunt, but was never given a full explanation as to why they didn't grow up together or why they had different names and, but she had been told that both of their biological parents had died within a week of each other in 1918 of the Spanish flu. And that's why they were separated. And they were both born just prior to 1918. So then I went back and I found the birth certificate of the first match's grandmother, the one who was the sister listed in the obituary. And her birth certificate said that she had a father that had that name, that had the Bjorgi name, and another name for the mother that wasn't in the DNA. But it gave her correct birth date and location. So I wasn't sure whether she had been given bum information, like it was just family lore, and these were her real parents. But the question was, why was the mother's name not anywhere in the DNA? Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Then I spoke to the third match, who was in California, and building up his tree a little bit, his grandmother, it appeared, had also been born in that location. And he gave me her name, was not the Bjorgi name. And I said, was she adopted, do you think? And he said, I don't know, I'll ask. Well, while he was asking, I started researching her, and I found her in the 1930 census with her parents under the name that she had used all her life.
Yes.
But it very clearly listed her as adopted daughter. So now we have 3 potential siblings.
On the census it said that?
On the census, it said adopted daughter.
Oh.
And it's so interesting because as adoptees, we kind of get irritated when somebody separates somebody out as adopted or not adopted. Like when celebrities die, if any of their children are adopted, they always mention, and their adopted child, so-and-so.
I see.
Which on one side irritates adoptees, because why is that even a separate thing?
Right.
On the other hand, it's very helpful in genealogy.
So you're torn.
So I have very mixed emotions about it.
I didn't know that the census actually reported whether someone was adopted or not.
It does. It only does if the reporter mentions it.
I see. It's not a question.
No, it's not a question. Is this your biological child?
Right.
But if they say, she's adopted, then they'll write adopted child.
Yeah.
Very rarely did it happen, but when it did, it's a bingo. And for me, it's an aha moment.
Yeah,
it's
sure.
an audible gasp. So now I have these 3 potential siblings. Because of the matches, they were all, none of them knew each other, but they all basically came from the same area, their grandparents. And I talked to the daughter of the one grandfather who she knew that he'd been adopted but didn't know where from. And she agreed to take a DNA test. Because my hypothesis is that her father is also my client's father.
Okay.
Okay? Because the very high match was her grandson. whereas the other matches, they were one generation removed. So he matches at the same level as these other matches, but they're one generation closer to these siblings.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
So the scenario I believe is true is that this gentleman, who was the gentleman in the picture in the side by side, is the father of my client.
Wow.
So we are still waiting for her DNA to come back in. Thank God she agreed to take it. So then this lady who was taking the DNA sent me an obituary that she had found in her father's things since we had spoken. That explained everything. And
Okay.
I'm going to read really quickly. 10th resident survives his wife by less than 1 week. Harry Bjorgi, aged 36 years, a widely known resident of this city and employed at the tube works as an electrician, died yesterday afternoon at his home, and then it gives the address. After a very brief illness of influenza and pneumonia. His wife, Mrs. Florence Bjorgi, died in the McKeesport Hospital last Monday from the same ailment. So that story was true.
Yeah.
But then we go down and it says he is survived by 6 children. 6. So, and he names them. So Ruth, Howard, Louise, Florence, Clarence, and Alberta. So Louise is the grandmother of the first DNA match. Clarence is the great-grandfather of the second DNA match. And Alberta is the grandmother, the one that I found in the census, the 1930 census, that is the grandmother of the third DNA match.
Wow.
So there are 3, but there are still 3 missing that we have to find, or we have to try to find. But that whole story ended up being true. But what's confusing is, so the birth certificate that the first grandmother has was a made up birth certificate. I don't know if she was legally adopted, but that is the birth certificate that is out in the public.
Well, but here's the thing: it's like if you said that the father that died was 36, so you can imagine that the mother was probably also, somewhere around that age.
Yeah.
And to have left, how old could those children have been?
They were
Six of them.
all under 10. Yeah.
Right, so somebody had to adopt them or take them in, and whether they were all taken in by the same person or not.
But they weren't.
Yeah.
I think, and the Louise, the first one, that she had a birth certificate where the last name was Bjorgi. So I think that was an uncle or somebody else within the family. I don't know exactly where they fit in. So,
Right.
And I think that the oldest were kept by the grandparents. And then the others were kind of spread out all over the place.
Wow.
But it's still unfolding, and I'm really excited about it. To be able to, and I'd love to be able to identify descendants of all 6 of these people so that they could all, get together in one place. And this family who was all separated can all be intact again.
Wow. And,
what I mean?
I just flashed forward another, 100 years and people looking back at all of the mess from all of the people who died during this pandemic, because you're talking about the flu of 1918.
1918.
And that, here's just one family of 6 people who were spread out around to different families because their parents both died during that pandemic. And I'm sure there are similar stories playing out right now. And
absolutely.
So.
Most of the people I know that lost both of their parents to COVID were adults.
Yes.
But thank goodness. But still, it's a thing. It's still
Everything
here. 100
old
years
is
later.
new again.
Absolutely. Should we take a break on that note?
Let's do that. Thank you for listening to CutOff Genes with Julie Dixon Jackson and Richard Castle. You can support us by going to patreon.com/CutOff Genes podcast. Now, back to the program.
All right, it is story time.
Yay.
And it is part 3 of my conversation with Megan Culhane Galbraith, author of The Guild of the Infant Savior, an Adopted Child's Memory Book. such a great conversation. I had to include the whole thing because it's fascinating. When last we spoke, we were talking about the structure of her book and how non sequitur it was, or non-linear. And I found that fascinating, but it really made sense. And she was talking about how, well, an adoptee's life, and as adoptees find things out, there's nothing linear in an adoptee's life when they're putting their life back together. So this is the last part of it, and we will see you on the other side.
Yeah. I mean, people who've read it who aren't adopted also, I think one of the techniques, is like grounding the reader in a place. And I was so lucky to be able to do that at so many places because like place is important in my narrative. So therefore place is important to my book. So in Dumbo in New York City, or in, the Guild of the Infant Savior, or in the operating room, it's like, if you can ground the reader in those places, they're like going to show up for you because they're like, okay, we're here. Okay. And you're this, and
right.
This is the time. Yeah.
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 Yeah. I think that's what really kept it so interesting for me because I was like,
you.
okay, ooh, yummy. That was delicious. Now what? Now what's this bite?
Yeah.
Thank
you. Well, I think doing things like, like you said, going to a town, like this is what is interested me so much, like going to New York City so many times, standing under these like buildings that my ancestor I'd never known had. The one place I'd never got to was like Chopin Point, and there was a mansion out there, which is a very wealthy area, apparently burned down, but like I didn't get to see that, but there's a lot of other places that I was like, I can't wait to go and stand there. Even the hospital, like I literally wanted to, it was all boarded up when I got there. I was like, I want to sneak in, find the maternity ward and stand there and see if I can just feel something.
Yes,
like feel.
I get that so much. Much. I get that even with my ancestors, which is why I'm such a voracious genealogist now, because I've been able to build all of my lines back to some to the 1700s, but I know where everybody was, and I want desperately, like I want to go to Yorkshire so badly and just go to these places because I Google Earth these addresses and I actually have visuals of what they look like now, which to me is I love it. I know other people are like, cool, whatever. I'm like, no, you don't understand.
Yeah, no, I think that people who aren't adopted maybe don't understand how important anything detail.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a very big, one of the critical things, one of the biggest things that exploded my brain, got me to write from a really interesting place was when, one of my teachers said to me, it was Joan Wickersham, and she's like, you need to write about how you felt at this particular time. And I tried and I tried and I tried. And I said to her, and I was like, you know what? I don't know how I felt. I think I felt numb. Mm-hmm. And she said, Megan, numbness is a feeling. Yeah. And all of a sudden I went, holy shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a
so then you get curious about that. Yeah, you get curious about it. You're like, why did I feel numb? Why was I sitting in my closet composing, music titled Persephone? What in the world was I doing as a kid who was like in my own head a lot?
Oh yeah.
Which felt like a very safe place to be, not expressing any feelings. And I think particularly that is probably where some of this comes from, this blowback about the book, because, these are all sorts of things that I never have expressed. And
right, because
I honestly never
you didn't have permission to do so.
And I honestly, to write a good book, especially a memoir or essays, you have to write like no one's going to read it. And so I did that.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that, I would get published felt like such a long shot.
Yeah.
And so now like people are reading it. I was like, oh, damn. But people also say
I love
like
how raw it is though.
That's right. They tell me like, this is so vulnerable and honest. And I was like, I know, I kind of sliced myself open.
I love it.
And was like, here it is, but I don't know any other way to do, and now I just live like that. I live like, I want to be open and vulnerable. I want to live like that. It's a hard place to be, but I'd rather not be numb again.
Do you feel like you're in a different place now that the book is published and you've you've put this all on paper and it's out there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel, the book to me was transformational to have it published and then to have to speak, because it's my voice. Mm-hmm. And you know how hard it is to use our voices. Mm-hmm. And there's a difference between having it on paper and now having to speak about it. And I've become so much stronger in my conviction to myself. And I've never, ever had that before. I've had to, I feel now that like when negative things happen to me because of using my voice, mm-hmm. I'm like, I am going to speak right into that pain, because that completely diffuses, it diffuses the pain, being able to almost share it, being able to speak into it. Uh-huh. Like, I think the people who inflict pain like that think you are going to be silent and not talk about it because it's so embarrassing to you. And I'm like, right. You do not know how it's not embarrassing this is.
Right.
Let's talk about, let's be as open and honest about about what's happening, because writing a book and being able to there were things through therapy, through other ways, I think being able to put words on things, like just hearing the words primal wound, like, what's that? I got to read about that. Mm-hmm. Just hearing codependency, what's that? I guess I should read about that. Mm-hmm. Or, adoptee trauma, what attachment disorder? What is
I just
that?
learned the term ghost kingdom. Do you know
what's
that one? That is,
no.
That is, so apparently it's the kingdom that we live in as children, as adopted children, whereas we have it's this fantastical life and all of these people are ghosts, so we imagine who they are.
Oh my God, this is amazing.
Uh-huh. I was like, oh, this talks to me.
This goes to the point of me using the dollhouse. Like, the dollhouse is intentional also, because what I realized, it gave me a window into why am I doing this? Why am I playing with these particular dolls? And it's because all along, since I was a kid, I was world building, right? So this is my way of world building. I remember hearing Dr. Ruth talking to Susan Stamberg at NPR. I went down to the National Building Museum to see this exhibit of dollhouses through the years, and Dr. Ruth herself is a dollhouse collector, and she said it stuck with me forever. She said, as a Holocaust survivor, the only one in her family who survived, she said, a dollhouse gives me safety. The mother and the father are there. The children are there. They're all safe. I can put them in bed. They're safe. And I thought, oh my God. So there's a reason, that's the thing, is there's a reason I was playing with this dollhouse. It's not just because I like creepy dolls. It's just,
isn't that interesting?
There's a reason. And the more I dug into that reason, the more I found research. It's like D.W. Winnicott, it's Eric Erickson, it's all these child psychologists who talk about play therapy, who talk about comfort objects, who talk about, if you think about how dolls are used in therapy, it's for trauma. It's like, tell me where he touched you.
Right.
Point to the doll, where did,
Wow.
And
that just triggered another memory for me. So I didn't have, nobody ever bought me a dollhouse as a child, but I used to make them out of cardboard boxes.
Oh, wow.
And they would be 2-story, 4-square. I can still visualize them. And I would cut the cardboard to make the walls, and I would cut out little doors, and I would make little furniture. All the time. So I was making my own art projects too. There you go.
Yeah, and there's a reason you do that. You know, there's a reason I mean, I would spend hours. I had a dollhouse that was the general store, and it was just like one of those kits, you know, of press board you put together.
Yeah.
But I would spend hours making little, you know, out of Cernet clay, I would be making, you know, little pieces of food to eat. And I had like maybe 3 Breyer horses. And I remember one time making a little leather saddle with copper with a copper like stirrups and a little bridle. It just, you know, I've always worked in miniature, and, you know, you think about like something that is on a miniature scale is really played out in a very dramatic way.
Yeah. Yep. I was also really drawn to like dolls, like little tiny dolls in like boxes. Boxes is a big thing for me. I don't know if that was a thing, but I've always collected boxes. I have all these empty boxes still because I don't know what to put in them. I don't know what's that about. Okay, I want to move on to this question because I think I know the answer to it, but I want to know how your brain works and how you got to it. Talk to me about the erotic fob watches.
Oh my God, it's my favorite. I literally go down a rabbit hole. I mean, like I was a journalist by training in college, and so I just get on these things, and I was like, I want to know what kind of pocket watch that this ancestor I never knew had, because my birth mother had given me, the first time we met, she gave me a watch fob, which is the chain and a little pendant that went on the watch fob, very fancy, that belonged to him.
Right.
I was like, okay, what kind of watch could he have had in the 19th century? He's a wealthy industrialist. And I started Googling just pocket watches, 19th century, and I'm like, erotic pocket watches? What in the hell is this? And so I just, you know, I went down this rabbit hole. I have all these pictures of the watches I described, but you can clearly see, like, it was the pocket porn of the time, you know.
Pocket porn.
It was, you know, you had, it's so interesting to me that they were given early on in the 17th century, you know, they became like objects for countries to trade, or, you know, it's like this little titillating thing to have in your pocket. You're a wealthy aristocrat. You can have your mistress in your pocket, and nobody knows because it's like just a watch. And then if you open the 2 secret doors or some secret door, there's the little scene.
I love a secret door. I think I need to get me one of these. I kind of went into a rabbit hole about it too after I was reading it in the book, and I was like, I have to see this.
Yeah, they're very expensive. It's like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, Elton John collects them, and they're very, I think, hard to find now, but they can go for $500,000.
Wow.
So yeah, I was like, ooh, I'd love to see one of these, but
have you ever seen one in person?
We don't have that.
Yeah.
No.
I wonder if they're in museums. Sure. I bet they're in a museum, like a museum of erotica or something. There has to be.
I know. I would imagine.
Yeah.
So through that lens, I just started thinking about like the whole idea of the male gaze and, you know, the eroticization of women as objects, and so that again was like a way of talking about subjects that were related to, you know, shameful women, fallen women, because everybody who, you know, in the 19th century, like the Victorians, were all buttoned up and whatever, but they're also like super bawdy and had their mistresses on the side, and you know, like in secret. So it also goes to like the idea of secrets and keeping secrets.
And then there was also the through line of the clocks. So the fob watches, the
time,
gave you, and the clocks in Dumbo that in the buildings that your ancestors built, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So it was all like thread of time, you know, and time, how things really haven't changed for women in many ways over time. You know, we still, they still want to punch the Madonna whore complex in the face. You know, it's like,
Yeah, enough already.
Just to be exactly. Exactly.
Okay, I have one last question. Do you believe that your grandparents conspired to hide some truth about your adoption?
I have no idea. It's just, it goes back to the intuition.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems to me that they probably knew. I mean, they were 2 miles away from my birth mother's family. My grandmother on my dad's side was a nurse, an RN. It's like you hear things, and you hear things in a small town. He had a very powerful friend, that bishop in Bridgeport, getting him on this list, getting my parents on this list to adopt.
Right.
I'll never know. I'll never know, and that's the hard part of adoption.
You might. Wait, there. You never know. If
How
I may be able to figure something out. I mean, well, no, I guess I won't be able to get to that, probably, depending on who, if, and when we can identify your father.
Yeah.
There's possibly a lot more information there. So,
well, I think if this is my biological cousin, we talked about, like, okay, when was my birthday? She's like, oh, wait, if this is true, you have a half brother, and he was born 6 months. I don't know if it was before or after I was. So I was like, if this is my birth father, he was married.
Most likely, yeah.
That.
So here's the thing. I mean, when your DNA comes in, there are so many people who have already tested. This half brother may be already in Ancestry.
Wow.
Do it.
Oh my God.
There's a reason you've been resisting. I think there, and granted, you've been a little bit busy. But I think this needs to be the most logical next step.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it's the time to do it.
Yep.
Yeah, especially having gotten my original birth certificate, and there was no father listed on that, of course.
Usually not. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Well, when that happens, when your results come back, let me know. And
I will,
and
absolutely.
I'll get on that. I'm excited to see if I can get some answers for you.
Thank you.
Megan, thank you so much for talking to me. I could talk.
Thank
I feel
you
like I could
so much
talk to
for
you
having
hours.
me.
It's such a great book. Tell us the name of the book again, so it's exactly correct.
It's The Guild of the Infant Savior, an Adopted Child's Memory Book. And it's available on bookstore.org and Amazon and anywhere books are sold. Yep. And I hope that people enjoy it and relate to it.
All right. Thank you so much, Megan, for that enlightening conversation. I loved it.
Thank you, Megan.
Appreciate it. Don't forget to read the book, guys, The Guild of the Infant Savior, an Adopted Child's Memory Book. It's such a great read. You'll read it in one night.
Wow. And I am Richard Castle. And you can go to my website, richardcastle.com, or you can follow me on the Twitter or Instagram at Castle Songs.
I'm Julie Dixon Jackson. Follow me on the Twitter at JoolsJackson with 2 O's. Follow the podcast on Twitter at CutOff Jeans Pod. Join the funky Facebook group. Go to Instagram. We have a CutOff Jeans podcast page there. And we also have a TikTok page, Jules Jackson Gen Genie.
I heard that Donald Trump is going to start a new social network called Truth. I think you should tell him where he can find it, Julie.
Oh, Donald. The truth is in your genes.